Welcome back to the deep dive. For the last 6 sessions, you and we've been picking apart one of the most complex, opaque financial systems in the world, Japan's special accounts.
It's been a huge undertaking. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of trillions of yen in government activity that, frankly, almost no one really understood.
Exactly. But today, we're changing gears entirely. This session, STA-7, it isn't about what we learned about the accounts themselves. It's about the tool we used.
Right.
We are running a structural checkpoint. We're turning our focus inward to, verify the analytical architecture that let us even study this thing in the first place.
The mission, verification of the structural transparency architecture, the STA and the GOA underneath it. We applied this framework to an unbelievably complex system, and today we ask, did it hold up?
So we're not here to judge or propose reforms?
No, not at all. No policy conclusions. We're just asking, was the structural lens we built actually capable of cutting through all that complexity?
So the core shift for you, the listener who's followed the whole series, is moving the conversation from that emotional language, words like darkness or conspiracy,
Right.
to understanding these accounts purely as a runaway structure, one that's driven fundamentally by time.
We're replacing intent with physics.
I love that. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the single biggest question that drove this whole series. After you peeled back all those layers of the special accounts, what was the primary driver? Malice.
That question, it really haunted us through the initial sources. Was this system driven by, malicious intent? Was it one person or group trying to hide money? Was it just simple blame or some deep conspiracy?
And honestly, that's the easiest path to take, isn't it? It's human nature to find a bad guy.
It is. It makes the problem feel solvable. You just fire the person, you change the law, problem solved.
But that's not what you found.
Structurally, we had to exclude those variables from the start. And the analysis, well, it confirmed that was the right move. We found this strong, almost overwhelming consistency with the hypothesis that these accounts were not some monster designed by someone.
So what were they?
The system's behavior was entirely consistent with the result of a designed institution just surviving for decades, 70, 80 years in some cases, without any updates.
Yeah.
Without rationalization. It's a pure case of historical accumulation.
That makes the narrative much less satisfying, but I think it makes the system itself much, much scarier.
It does.
If it wasn't malice, what was the mechanism? What drove it so far out of control?
It was what we call the runaway structure. Based on the sources, we define this as a state where the institution just continues to operate and swell sort of autonomously.
And that happens because of?
It happens because of that historical accumulation combined with, and this is critical, velocity mismatch. The system moves beyond the scope of human intent or control because its parts are just moving at radically different speeds. Its internal logic has hardened over generations.
Okay, wait. Velocity mismatch. That's abstract. Let's ground that for a second. What does it look like when a government fund is running at the wrong speed?
Think about the budget process. Governments, they typically review spending on an annual cycle, right? A short cycle OS, an operational system.
Right. High velocity, high visibility.
Exactly. But the special accounts, they were designed to manage long-term projects. We're talking 10, 20, even 30-year infrastructure funds, pensions, forestry investments. That's a low-speed OS.
So if you force the long-term plan into the short-term annual review window, you get friction.
You get friction. That's it. The high-velocity process just doesn't have the tools or the time to correctly evaluate the low-velocity structure. They rub against each other. That's the shear. And the long-term structure becomes opaque simply because the annual system can't grasp its logic.
And that opacity leads to the paradox we observed.
Yes.
Which brings us back to that term, or darkness. The information was technically public, the documents were there.
They were.
But the system remained ungraspable. It felt hidden, even when it wasn't being actively concealed.
Precisely. That term, darkness, it was a narrative tag applied after the fact to explain that feeling of ungraspability. It wasn't an accusation of hidden money. It was a societal attempt to label a system whose size and complexity just exceeded human cognitive limits.
The structure was just too vast, too layered.
And too speed mismatched to hold in a simple mind or to see through a simple budget review.
Okay, that successfully reframes the whole phenomenon. It's not a moral failing, it's a structural certainty. So now let's test the framework itself. We use these very conceptual terms: Neos layers, velocity, calcification, membrane tension. These are abstract ideas. Did they actually unify the observations we made across all 6 of the previous deep dives?
This is the core confirmation of STA-7. The framework was incredibly efficient, and here's why. We didn't have to invent a new explanation for every single special account we looked at.
You didn't have to force fit the data?
We didn't. The key insight was that seemingly separate problems, whether we were looking at the internal logic of specialized funds in STA-2, or the autonomy of ministry structures in STA-3, or the weird mechanics of fiscal investment in STA-4.
Or even the dysfunction at the general account interface.
Exactly. All of them. They were all readable as just different cross-sections of the identical underlying structural dynamics.
So we found that all these different problems and all these different ministries, they actually shared the same root cause. What was that recurring pattern? What bound them all together?
We came down to three common structural behaviors. The physics of the runaway structure, we already talked about the first one, velocity mismatch, or shear.
Right, the friction between the fast annual political clock and the slow, decades-long institutional clock.
Perfect. And the second behavior was the hardening effect, what we called calcification.
Calcification.
Yes. This describes the hardening of those long-term structures, like the funds, when the stop command or time to live, the TTL, is absent.
So it's like a piece of code that keeps looping forever, even after its task is done.
That's a great analogy. Imagine a piece of ancient software. It was designed for a task, but no one ever wrote the command to shut it down when the task was complete. The purpose just evaporates, but the structure doesn't die. It just keeps running.
It maintains itself just because it can.
It can. It enters that state of purpose loss and becomes a self-sustaining zombie structure. It stops operating for the citizen and starts operating for its own existence. That is calcification.
And finally, there was the boundary problem, the point where the fast world and the slow world connect.
That's membrane tension and compatibility error. It's the friction you get from structural misalignment. You have this highly specialized proprietary OS, the special account, and you're trying to connect it to a general-purpose, visibility-focused OS, the general account.
They speak different languages.
Different languages, different logic trees, and there is no proper translation layer specified. That interface tension, it ensures that information transfer is minimal and friction is maximized.
That's powerful validation. The framework let us see a massive institution not as 1,000 unrelated fragments, but as a collection of isomorphic structures.
Meaning they share the same root physics. It allowed us to decompose the system, hold its parts, and then coherently represent its logic. It showed that complexity, when you look at it the right way, is actually unified by a simple set of rules.
Okay, so let's talk about the standard for success here. If the goal wasn't policy reform, and we have to keep emphasizing that,
Right.
what did transparency actually mean in the context of this deep dive?
We used a very, very stringent definition, one that goes beyond politics. Transparency for us is not just the disclosure of documents. We already know the data was public.
Right.
For us, transparency was the presentation of a cognitively accessible structure. Success meant that the special accounts were returned to a verifiable structure for anyone. It meant a non-expert, like you or me, could trace the core logic using these common physical metaphors.
That's a crucial distinction. It allowed us to bypass the emotional language of blame and conspiracy.
Exactly.
It let us verify using physical concepts, velocity, hardening, interface tension, even without specialized accounting knowledge. You can explain this to a fifth grader.
And critically, the sources confirmed the framework acted as what we called a structure translation protocol, or STP. The design was so robust that the same key structural units, the velocity mismatch, the calcification point, could be reliably re-extracted whether the source material was read by a human analyst.
Or processed through an AI model.
Right. That is the definition of a stable, verifiable structure.
Okay, so we've established the structure is verifiable. But in doing that, we simultaneously revealed a critical limitation, didn't we?
We did.
Understanding the structure doesn't mean you can instantly fix it.
And that's the key takeaway about system speed. While the structure is now clear, it's visible to everyone, political and institutional intervention is inherently much, much slower than the structure itself. Transparency does not guarantee immediate correction. The structure has inertia.
And this limitation, ironically, confirms the initial hypothesis.
It does, perfectly.
The fact that the problem is not immediately fixable confirms the inherent nature of a runaway structure. By definition, it's not instantly correctable by short-term political will.
Our framework functioned as a verification device, not a solution device. We confirmed the physics of the problem, we established a stable footing, the structure is visible, and now we know its speed.
Which leads us to the final critical question that really makes this deep dive relevant globally. If this structural verification holds up here in Japan, the next question isn't academic, it's immediate. Is this phenomenon unique to Japan?
It absolutely travels. And we have to stress this point. The structural conditions we extracted from the STA series are not a Japanese anomaly. This model was designed specifically to open a bridge to similar, complex, time-driven structures across the English-speaking world and beyond.
So the mechanism is universal.
It's universal. The historical accumulation, the velocity mismatch, the calcification, this happens wherever modern states try to manage long-term projects using short-term political instruments. It's an inherent system flaw. It's driven by time.
So the names are different, the contexts are different, but the fundamental structure is identical. What are some of those structural equivalents? What should we be looking for?
You should look for anything that exists outside of central budget visibility. The sources list entities all over the world that share the exact same pathology. You're looking for things like off-budget vehicles.
Where financing is done outside of typical scrutiny.
Precisely. Or look at special purpose vehicles, SPVs, and quasi-fiscal entities. These are government-created structures that often have their own low-speed, autonomous logic. They're intentionally shielded from fast political review.
What about larger institutions?
Oh, yes. Think of large, quasi-independent bodies like government-sponsored entities, GSEs, or specialized institutions like policy banks and development financial institutions. They are designed for long-term stability and funding autonomy, which, without a clear stop command, makes them
Calcification machines.
perfect way to put it, calcification machines.
The implication here is huge. The STA framework, using Japan's special accounts as this highly detailed, validated reference model, can now be applied as a horizontal observation OS to these global structures.
Right. We have confirmed that this is a structural phenomenon that inevitably arises when modern states deal with time and long-term commitment.
It's not an endpoint then.
Not at all.
Yeah.
STA-7 is not an endpoint. It's the establishment of a stable, universal footing. If the same exact pattern of velocity mismatch, hardening, and interface error can be seen in those international structures, then the model is validated for global application. We moved this system from perceived darkness to quantifiable, observable structure.
And that observable structure, driven by time, not by human malice, is the problem itself. So consider this provocative thought as you finish this deep dive. If institutions are now fundamentally defined by their speed and their capacity to harden, what other complex, long-lived global systems are already operating in a structural runaway state right now? I mean, think about regulatory bodies that have existed for 50 years, international alliances struggling to adapt to new geopolitical realities, or even the underlying code of massive digital platforms. We invite you to start looking for the precise patterns of velocity and calcification in your own sphere. The physics of bureaucracy, it turns out, is universal. Thanks for joining us for this structural checkpoint.